you did everything right. You max out the 401k, you diversified, you hit the number. And now you're sitting across from retirement and something feels wrong. Not wrong like the math doesn't work, wrong like nobody told you what comes next. Because they didn't. Because the entire financial industry optimized you for the wrong game. Here's the question that will tell you whether or not this episode is going to be for you. Do you know specifically where every dollar of your retirement income will come from? Which sources are guaranteed regardless of what the market does? And which sources depend on your portfolio cooperating? If the answer is, I don't know or not exactly, keep listening because that's going to change today. Welcome. You're listening to The Income Standard, where retirement income is designed, not guessed. I am Tod Long, and this is the show for people who are done accumulating and ready to start engineering. Let's get into it. I want to start with something that nobody in the industry will say out loud because it's going to indict almost everybody. The financial industry is brilliant at one thing: accumulation. Save more, invest better, grow your balance, hit the number. For 30 or 40 years, that's been the game. And most people play that very, very well. But here's what happens at retirement. You cross the finish line, you've got $800,000, you got $1.2 million, maybe even $2 million stashed. And then someone like your advisor, HR department, a calculator on a website tells you you've made it. And honestly, for about 3 weeks, that feels true. It feels like you had made it. But then the questions start to seep in. How much can I actually spend? What if the market drops? What if I live to 92 years old? What if my spouse outlives me by 15 or 20 years? What if I need long-term care at 85? And then suddenly that number, the one you've been spending 40 years, 35 years chasing, that $1.2 million, starts to look like a lot less like a destination and a lot more like a starting point for a problem no one prepared you for. And here's why that happens. Accumulation and income distribution are completely different disciplines. The skills that make you a great saver have almost nothing to do with the skills required to engineer sustainable retirement income. The tools are different. The math is different. The risks are different. And most importantly, the psychology is different. A great accumulator can be a terrible income engineer. And most people don't realize that until they're already on the other side of the line. That gap, that blind spot between accumulation and distribution is what this show exists to close. Let me give you a framework that I've used for 22 years, actually a little bit more than 22 years, to explain this to my clients. Think of your retirement life in two phases. Phase one is the accumulation phase. You're working, you're saving, money flows in, the goal is growth, risk is your friend because you have time to recover from losses. Volatility is just noise. A bad year in the market is a buying opportunity. Phase two is the distribution phase. You're retired. You're no longer adding to the pile of money. You're actually drawing from it. Money flows out. And everything that was true in phase one is now inverted. Risk is no longer your friend. Volatility is no longer noise. A bad year in the market, especially in the first few years of retirement, isn't a buying opportunity. It's actually potentially a permanent impairment of your income. And here's the insight that changes everything. Most people walk into phase two thinking in phase one terms. They're still asking, what's my return? When they should be asking, what's my income? They're still focused on the size of their balance when they should be focused on the durability of their cash flow. They're still managing for growth when they should be engineering for income. That's the retirement trap. It's not a market trap. It's not a tax trap. It's a mindset trap. And it catches smart, prepared, financially responsible people every single day because nobody told them the game has changed. Now, you may be wondering, if the shift from accumulation to distribution is this significant, why doesn't the financial industry actually address it? And that's a fair question. And the honest answer has two parts. Part one is structural. The financial services industry, like the big wirehouses, the 401k platforms, the robo-advisors, they're almost entirely built around accumulation. The business model runs on assets under management. The more you accumulate, the more fees they collect. The entire infrastructure, the dashboards, the quarterly statements, the performance reports, they're all designed to show you one thing and one thing only: how your balance is growing. None of that infrastructure is built for the question, how do I turn this balance into reliable lifetime income? Because there's no standard business model incentive to answer that question very well. Part two is psychological. Talking about income distribution requires talking about things that make people feel uncomfortable. It requires talking about how long you may live, which is an uncomfortable conversation. It requires talking about what happens if the market drops 30% in year 2 of retirement, which is a very scary conversation. It requires talking about what your spouse's financial situation looks like after you die, which is a conversation most couples actively avoid. So advisors who stay in accumulation mode aren't necessarily incompetent. Some of them are very, very good at what they do. They just haven't been trained to pivot, and they're not really incentivized to start a conversation that might make the client feel uncomfortable. The accumulation expert and the income engineer are two different people. Most investors don't realize they've been working with one when they needed the other. Here's what it looks like in practice. And I hear versions of this story regularly. Someone who has been with their same advisor for 20 some odd years, great relationship, solid returns. The advisor has done a good job building out the portfolio. Then retirement comes. And the advisor's response to, how do I turn this into income, is essentially a more sophisticated version of the 4% rule. Take 4% a year, rebalance annually, and the math says you'll be fine. That's not wrong advice, but it's accumulation thinking applied to a distribution problem. It treats the portfolio as a perpetual machine when it should be treated as a foundation to build income architecture on top of. The 4% rule was developed way back in the 90s, based on historical market data from a specific era and designed for a 30-year retirement horizon. It says nothing about your income floor. It says nothing about your sequence of returns risks. It says nothing about what happens to your tax situation when RMDs kick in at 73. And it says nothing about what your guaranteed income looks like if you live to 95. It's a starting point. It's not a plan. If your entire income strategy for retirement is withdrawal rate from a portfolio, you have a starting point. You don't have a plan. The income standard is what fills that gap. If you've been nodding along to any of this, if your current retirement conversation has been entirely about portfolio performance and withdrawal rates with no discussion of guaranteed income architecture, that's not a minor gap. That's the whole conversation you haven't had yet. So what does the income standard actually mean? Well, it means this. Retirement income isn't something you figure out at retirement. It's something you design 5 to 10 years before it. The income standard is a written, stress-tested income architecture, not a withdrawal rate and a prayer. It means knowing specifically and precisely where every dollar of your retirement income comes from, which sources are guaranteed, which are flexible, which are protected from inflation, which are protected from market volatility, which layer covers your non-negotiables, and which layer funds the life you actually want to live. That's not what most people have. Most people have a balance and a percentage. I've got $1.2 million and my advisor says I can pull 4%. Well, that's not an income architecture. That's a starting point. And it's a fragile one at that. The income standard is different. It's structural. It's proactive. It's engineered. And that's what this show is about. Let me make this concrete because I don't believe in abstract principles without any kind of practical application. Let's talk about two people. I'm going to call them Michael and James. Both are 63 years old. Both are planning to retire at 65. Both have $1.2 million in assets. Michael has a withdrawal strategy. His advisors built him a diversified portfolio that's 60% stocks, 40% bonds, and told him to pull $50,000 a year, which is right around 4%. Michael feels pretty good about this. He's done the math. He's looked at the Monte Carlo projections. His advisor says he has a 91% chance of not running out of money over time. James has an income architecture. His plan has 3 layers. Layer 1 is his guaranteed income floor. Social Security optimized for a situation, plus a fixed index annuity that generates $28,000 a year guaranteed for life, regardless of what the market does. That floor covers his non-negotiable expenses, his mortgage, utilities, healthcare premiums, the basics. Layer 2 is his discretionary income layer, a managed investment portfolio of $500,000 that generates income and growth for travel, gifts, lifestyle expenses, etc. Layer 3 is his legacy layer, a smaller allocation that's purely long-term growth, not touched for 15 to 20 years. Now, both Michael and James retire at 65. 6 months later, the market drops 32%. What happens to Michael? Michael's portfolio drops from $1.2 million to about $800,000. Now he has 2 options. He can keep pulling $50,000 a year, which is now 6.2% of his remaining balance. At that pace, that significantly increases his risk of running out of money, or he can cut his spending. Neither option is what he planned for. And here's the thing about Michael's situation. It's not that he made bad decisions. His portfolio is fine. His advisor is fine. The 4% rule is actually a legitimate planning tool. The problem is that his income was entirely dependent on market performance at the worst possible moment. Now, what happens to James? James's portfolio also drops. His discretionary layer takes a hit, but his floor, his $28,000 a year in guaranteed income, keeps arriving every month, regardless of what happens in the market. James doesn't have to sell anything in a down market. He doesn't have to cut his non-negotiable expenses. He doesn't have to make his fear-based or make any fear-based decisions about his financial future. He waits. His portfolio recovers, and his income architecture holds. Same starting balance, completely different outcomes. The difference is structure. That's what income engineering looks like in practice. Not a better portfolio, a better architecture. If you listen to that and found yourself thinking about Michael and not James, that's important information. It means your income is currently structured around market performance rather than guaranteed sources. That's the gap. And it's the exact gap the Income Standard Review is designed to find. At this point, I want to address something directly, because every time I lay out the income engineering framework, a few predictable objections come up. And I'd rather deal with them now than to let them sit unanswered in the back of your mind. The first objection is my advisor says I'm fine, and I believe you, and your advisor may be right. But here's the question I'd push back with. What specifically does fine mean? Does it mean your Monte Carlo shows a 90% success probability? Or does it mean your essential monthly expenses are covered by guaranteed income that cannot be reduced by a market downturn, regardless of how long you live? Those are not the same statements. One is a probability, the other is a structure. I'm not asking you to fire your advisor. I'm asking you to be more precise about what fine actually means and whether it means what you need it to mean. 90% probability of success means a 10% probability of failure. At the level of your retirement income, a 10% chance of running short is not a small risk. It's the most important risk in your financial life. The second objection I usually get is, I don't want to lock my money up in an annuity. That's a real concern. And it's based on a real experience many people or their parents have had with the wrong product sold for the wrong reasons by someone who wasn't thinking about income architecture. Here's what I'd offer. Not all annuities are the same. An annuity that locks your entire retirement savings into an inflexible contract with high surrender charges and opaque costs is a bad product. I wouldn't recommend it either. A fixed index annuity with a lifetime income rider sized specifically to close your income floor gap and nothing more is a precision instrument. It does one thing extremely well. It guarantees that a specific dollar amount of income arrives every month for as long as you live, with principal protection from market losses. The question isn't, do I want an annuity? The question is, do I have a gap between my guaranteed income and my non-negotiable expenses? If yes, what's the most efficient, cost-effective way to close that gap permanently? Sometimes an annuity is the right answer. Sometimes it's Social Security optimization. Sometimes it's a combination. The tool should match the problem. Now here's the third objection. I'll figure it out when I get there. This is the most expensive objection of the three. Here's why. The most powerful planning window for retirement income is the 5 to 10 years before you retire. That's when you still have earned income to bridge gaps. That's when Roth conversions are most tax efficient. That's when Social Security decisions haven't been locked in yet. That's when annuity options are more favorable. And that's when you have the most flexibility to engineer the right architecture before you need it. The day you retire, that window closes. You're now in distribution mode. And every decision you make is reactive rather than proactive. So you're not really engineering anymore. You're actually managing. I've had this conversation with people who waited, who arrived at retirement age with great portfolio and no income architecture, and suddenly found themselves making fear-based decisions in a down market because they hadn't built the structure that would have let them wait it out. I'll figure it out whenever I get there is a reasonable approach for a lot of life's problems. Retirement income engineering is not one of them. The window to build the right income architecture is before you actually need it. Once you're drawing income, you're playing defense. The income standard is an offense you build before the game starts. If any of those objections sounded familiar, if you said one of them to yourself or to an advisor, I'd ask you to sit with what you just heard. Not because you're wrong to have the concern, but because the concern deserves a more precise answer than you may have gotten before in the past. If you're somewhere between 55 and 70 years old and you've been accumulating well, but nobody's ever sat down with you to map out your income architecture, I want to be direct with you about something. That conversation is not optional. It is the difference between a retirement that holds regardless of what the market does and one that depends on conditions you can't control. The Income Standard Review is a structured 6-component analysis of your income architecture. We look at your income layering, your RMD exposure, your longevity risk, your tax sequencing, your fee structure, and your guaranteed income foundation. At the end, you know exactly where you stand. Not a probability, a structure. and you know exactly where the gaps are, if any exist. This review is designed for pre-retirees who are within 10 years of retirement and ready to act on what they find. If you're in research mode, no problem. This podcast is the right starting point. When you're ready to look at your own numbers, the review will be waiting for you. Schedule your review at theincomestandard.com. No cost, no pitch, just measurement. Because the first step to engineering better income is knowing exactly where you stand. That is the income standard for this week, folks. If this episode gave you a framework you didn't have before, share it with someone who actually needs it. Forward it to a friend who's 5 years from retirement and still thinking in terms of balance sheets instead of income architecture. And if you found yourself thinking about your own income floor while listening, like what's guaranteed, what's not, and what that gap might be, that's the signal. That's when this review makes sense. The review is waiting for you at theincomestandard.com. Again, that is theincomestandard.com. There's no cost, there's no pitch, just measurement. I'm Tod Long. We'll talk to you next week.